I was in disbelief when I arrived late to the company party and saw my boss dancing with my wife. That scene destroyed me, but then I backed off and left the party and went to get a lawyer immediately, because what was about to come would shock everyone. It wasn't just the visual shock, it was the collapse of an entire life in a single instant. It wasn't just a dance, it was the body language, the intimate touch, the looks that spoke more than 1,000 words could ever say. There, amidst artificial lights and fake smiles, everything I had built with sweat, patience and love was crumbling. I felt my stomach churn and a dry chill run down my spine as I hid in the shadows, watching that blatant betrayal in the center of the room as if it were a spectacle. Her laughter, which for years had been the sound that calmed me at the end of difficult days, now cut me like sharp blades, echoing in my mind with cruelty. And he, that arrogant, smiling man who had so often greeted me with a firm handshake and empty promises, now held my wife's waist as if he already owned what had never belonged to him. There was no more room for doubt, only one certainty: I had been deceived, used, betrayed. And while everyone toasted the company's success, I was plotting the beginning of the downfall of two impostors. I didn't react there, and not out of cowardice. It was a strategy. I needed to contain myself, keep quiet, take a deep breath and act with the coolness I had learned over a lifetime of sacrifices. I left that place with my heart in pieces, but with my mind lit. I called my lawyer before I even got to my car. Minutes later, I was already sitting in front of him, describing the scene that still burned in my eyes. He listened in silence, with a sober but firm expression. When I finished, his words were like a shot: "We will destroy this farce. But we will do it with class. You will not only win. You will rewrite this story." And that was when my reconstruction began. Not of a failed marriage, but of myself. I didn't want empty revenge, I wanted justice. I wanted to return, with interest, everything that had been taken from me. And they had no idea what was coming. Over the next few days, I kept up my appearance. I slept next to her, with the venom of betrayal still fresh on my lips. She continued with her theatrical gestures, her practiced smiles, her programmed kisses. I responded to everything with the same dose of theater. I became a mirror: she smiled, I smiled; she asked questions, I answered. But inside, my soul bled. And in the silence of the early morning, I delved into records, investigated, collected evidence, cross-referenced diaries, searched emails, consulted cameras. It was as if every detail of our past now served a greater purpose: to dismantle the lies she had constructed. I discovered that it was not a slip-up, it was a plot. They had been talking to each other for months. Messages with double meanings, trips that coincided by chance, extended meetings that ended in hotels disguised as events. And she, the woman who swore eternal love to me, had transformed our home into a theater of deception. But nothing hit me as hard as reading, with my own eyes, her words typed on her cell phone: "He doesn't suspect anything. He's pathetic." That hurt me more than the image of the two of them together. That wasn't just betrayal, it was mockery. I was the butt of jokes, the man who paid for everything while being ridiculed behind my back. And the most absurd thing, she was planning to leave me. Not now, of course. Instead, she wanted to ensure that her lover had professional stability, something that my imminent promotion would ensure. I was the bridge she would cross before abandoning me. And the boss, the man I was loyal to, the man I had defended so many times in front of colleagues and superiors, was using my trust as a ladder to power. Their plan was clear, dirty, and real. But they made a mistake: they underestimated the man they had created. I was molded in pain, polished in resignation, strengthened by the weariness of a lifetime that had given me nothing for free. And now, it was my turn to show that the fall of a traitor can be more painful than that of an innocent betrayed. When the process began, it was like lighting a fuse in an underground mine. First came her shock upon receiving the documents. Her hands were shaking, her eyes couldn't read beyond the header. She stared at me as if she were seeing a stranger. And at that moment, I really was. I was no longer the meek, predictable husband. I was the storm she herself had conjured. The look of panic on her face when she learned that all the messages were recorded, that the times matched, that the images existed, was something I will never forget. She tried to deny it, she tried to cry, she tried to seduce me. But it was too late. I was in another place, in another skin, in another time. The pain had transformed into something much more powerful, lucidity. And lucidity is the greatest terror for those who live on lies. He didn't escape either. The boss, now ex-boss, was surprised by an internal report sent to the board with financial details that he had been secretly manipulating, and that I had already been discreetly monitoring. I used his ego against him. He told me everything, he trusted me as if I were his mirror. Little did he know that I was the reflection of his downfall. The company opened an audit, and within a few days he was dismissed, humiliated, exposed. Not only did he lose his job, he lost respect, credibility and, most importantly, he lost control. Their relationship, now out in the open, became a scandal. Neither of them knew how to deal with the other under pressure. She accused him of not defending her, he treated her like a time bomb. The love that was born from deception died suffocated by the truth. And I, who had been the puppet in their play, was now the author of the new story. In court, I made a point of maintaining my composure. I let the facts speak. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just showed them. I showed the images, the reports, the screenshots. The judge was categorical: proven treason, attempted financial manipulation, parental alienation. She would not be entitled to any property. And what's more, the children would stay with me. With me, whom they know as their father, as their safe haven, as the only constant in a home that had fallen apart. Today, when I look back, I feel no pride. There is no glory in winning a war I never asked to fight. But there is relief. There is justice. And there is the promise of a new beginning that began right there, at that party, with that cursed dance. It was the end of a life, and the beginning of another. The most ironic thing. The man who planned to steal everything from me ended up being publicly exposed by another scandal that I didn't even need to create. And she, who thought she would have it all, now has no one. But there is one thing I haven't told you yet. Something I discovered by accident in the middle of the process, a revelation that completely changes the meaning of everything I've experienced. A last piece, hidden in the puzzle of this betrayal. And when you know what it is, you'll understand that this story was never just about betrayal. Welcome to the channel. Here, we make it clear from the beginning, we do not support, encourage or romanticize any form of cheating. The stories you will hear are fictional, but based on real situations, created to show how cheating destroys homes, corrodes relationships, and ruins lives. Get ready now to dive into an intense narrative, full of twists and turns and emotions on the surface. Sit back, take a deep breath, and prepare to hear a shocking story. David had always been a silent man, one of those who said more with his eyes than with his words. He had a restrained way of expressing what he felt, but when he loved completely, deeply and loyally. His presence was calm, steady, a rare kind of stability in a chaotic world. When he met Laura, he was still a young analyst who had just been promoted to a promising multinational company. She was everything he ever thought he deserved, brilliant, spontaneous, full of an energy that made any room light up around her. They met in a busy cafe, between an unexpected exchange of glances and a wrong order that ended up becoming an inside joke between them for years. From the beginning, Laura proved to be different from anything he had ever known. Independent, self-assured, a woman who knew exactly what she wanted from life, and at that moment, she seemed to want exactly what he was looking for: peace, partnership, a solid future without games. Over time, what began as a light connection turned into something deeper. The first few months were marked by discoveries, spontaneous smiles, wine-soaked evenings, and whispered promises between pillows. Laura liked challenges and testing herself, and David was the kind of man who inspired confidence even in the most suspicious people. He didn't need to impose himself to be respected, or raise his voice to be heard. And perhaps that was exactly what won Laura over, the way he looked at her, as if he truly saw her completely, without needing her to be anything other than herself. When they decided to live together, their small apartment in the city center came alive with her details, colorful paintings, hanging plants, books stacked in unlikely corners, and with his quiet routine. David took charge of the mornings, making coffee with almost ritualistic precision, while Laura, a night owl, loved to fill the early hours with playlists and creative ideas. They were never a noisy couple. The arguments that did occur, because there always are, were brief, honest, and invariably ended with long, eye-to-eye conversations, as if both were always willing to save their bond before winning any argument. When they got married, there was no grand ceremony. They opted for something intimate, in the countryside, among close friends, with simple but meaningful promises. For them, the value of words lay in the commitment hidden between the lines, and not in the pomp of rehearsed speeches. Time has matured them together. David has grown within the company, climbing step by step with patience and competence. He was never the type to ask for merit. He preferred to show it with results. The board recognized this in him, a firm presence, a leader who didn't shout but inspired respect. Laura, on the other hand, built a solid career in marketing. Creative, bold, with an innovative vision, she stood out for transforming even the most limited projects into something surprising. Despite their different rhythms, they found an admirable balance between ambition and affection. They never stopped having dinner together when possible, going on vacations, laughing at the same inside jokes, or getting lost in random conversations that lasted for hours. In time, children came, two, to be exact. First, Emily, with curious eyes and an intense personality. Then, Noah, calmer, more reflective, but absurdly affectionate. Their house, now more spacious and in a quiet neighborhood, has become a true refuge. Toys shared space with books, children's drawings mixed with framed photos of their honeymoon in Santorini, and children's smiles filled the silences with music. David, despite his increasing responsibilities, made a point of being present. She took Emily to ballet lessons and helped Noah with school projects. On weekends, she enjoyed cooking for the family and organizing little surprises, a tent in the backyard for camping with the kids, a special dinner for Laura after a hard day at work. It was in these details, silent and constant, that he expressed what he felt. Laura also dedicated herself with zeal. She balanced motherhood and career with almost magical skill. She knew when to be a mother, when to be a wife, and when to just be herself. She always kept a close group of friends, took care of her health, read a lot, and tried hard to keep the flame alive which, according to her, could not be left at the mercy of routine. Sometimes he would surprise David with racy texts in the middle of the day or unexpected invitations for romantic getaways. Even after so many years, there was a kind of mutual admiration that never wore off, or at least, it didn't seem to. It was a relationship built on respect, affection, and companionship. At the company, David was starting to be considered for higher positions. He was seen as a promising candidate for vice president. This brought new responsibilities, more hours away from home, long meetings, strategic trips. Laura understood, or said she did. She always encouraged his growth, said she was proud of the man he had become. And he believed her. Until then, there was no reason to suspect anything. She continued to be kind, present, and affectionate. And even on days when they seemed distant, there was always some effort to reconnect. David, in turn, was grateful. He never failed to recognize that much of his success also came from the peace he found at home, from the structure Laura provided him, from the trust they shared. In the professional environment, he began to work more closely with the company president, a charismatic man, always very sociable, the kind of man who knows how to move around every department as if he belonged there. The two began to meet frequently at events, parties, and corporate dinners. Little by little, their relationship grew closer, creating a bond of trust based on professional respect. David admired the firm but easygoing way in which his boss ran the company. Even though his personal attitude sometimes made him uncomfortable, inappropriate comments, easy laughter, insistent glances at some female employees, he preferred to focus on the hierarchy and maintain his composure. After all, it was not his job to judge, but to deliver results. The family routine continued with its ups and downs, but without ruptures. The relationship between David and Laura was viewed with admiration by close friends. They were the couple who seemed to have beaten the statistics. The couple who not only split bills, but shared dreams. The ones who laughed together at parent-teacher meetings, who exchanged knowing glances at children's birthday parties, who hugged each other naturally. There was, of course, the inevitable distance that comes with the years and responsibilities. Sometimes they went to bed at different times. Sometimes one preferred silence and the other wanted to talk. Sometimes life got heavy. But nothing seemed abnormal. Nothing out of the ordinary. David still brought her coffee in bed on Sundays. Laura still left notes with encouraging phrases stuck to the bathroom mirror. The connection remained, even if in a more subtle way. And that was enough for him. And then came the invitation to the company's big party. An end-of-year celebration in a luxurious hall, complete with a live band, sophisticated buffet, closing speeches and a celebratory atmosphere. David, immersed in the closing of an important project, arrived late. He had told Laura he would go straight from the office. She went first, excited, wearing a red dress that he himself complimented before leaving, with that sparkle in her eyes that had always fascinated him. He hadn't responded to any of her messages during the afternoon, too busy with the numbers, the report, the last-minute adjustments. But he thought he would see her soon, dancing as she liked, smiling as she did when she was surrounded by people. Little did he know that when he walked through those doors later that night, he wouldn't just see a party, he would see the first sign that his life, carefully constructed over more than a decade, was about to change irreversibly. And that's exactly where the story starts to change. The night of the party arrived with the accumulated weight of the previous weeks. David left the office late, his face exhausted and his body tense from a marathon of meetings and crucial decisions. Even so, he dressed carefully. His navy blue suit was neat, his tie discreet, and he wore the perfume that Laura always praised. He knew he would arrive hours late, but he tried to make up for it by intending to find his wife at the height of her excitement, smiling among his colleagues and toasting with that sparkle in his eyes that he always seemed to reserve for the best moments. On the way, he thought about sending a message, but decided to surprise her. He could already imagine the scene. She would see him coming in, walk across the room with that confident gait, and hug him tightly, as she did in the brief reunions of their busy daily lives. He was ready to switch off his professional mode and allow himself, for a few hours, to simply be present, by her side, away from the pressures, just the two of them in a crowd. The party room was elegant, decorated in gold and white tones, a band played lively music on a well-lit stage, and people were divided between the dance floor, the tables filled with glasses and laughter, and the corridors where more discreet conversations took place. David entered quietly, without fanfare, his eyes scanning the room in search of her. He passed groups of colleagues who greeted him warmly, but he continued with his gaze focused, attentive. It didn't take long until he saw her. She was in the center of the dance floor, spinning gently to the sound of a reinvented classical song, her hair loosely dancing with her, the red dress elegantly defining her silhouette. She was laughing. She laughed in a way he hadn't seen in a long time, as if the world had stopped for that moment. But what really caught his attention was not her smile, but rather the hand that firmly guided her waist, the palm open with intimacy, as if that gesture were rehearsed, belonging to a place where he, David, had never been invited to enter. The mind rejected the evidence for an instant. He tried to justify the touch as part of the dance, the look as an exaggeration of the light, the laughter as a coincidence. But the body knew. His heart sank, his stomach churned, and his feet froze on the polished floor. He watched them for long seconds, while the boss, his superior, his mentor, the man who had so often praised him in public, spun her around with the confidence of someone who already knew every curve of the body he carried. And she she wasn't just being led. It was delivered. There was no hesitation, there was no discomfort. There was surrender, complicity, harmony. That wasn't improvisation. It was intimacy. When the song ended, the boss leaned down to her ear and whispered something that made her bite her lower lip, looking away with that shy, provocative gesture that David knew so well. There, at that moment, the ground seemed to move away from under his feet. The clapping around disguised the internal noise of the collapse. Nobody noticed. No one saw what he saw. No one felt what he felt. David backed away. His instincts screamed for confrontation, for response, for action. But there was something stronger inside him, a furious, strategic silence, the same one he used in decisive negotiations. He turned and left the room with firm, measured steps. The night air hit him like a blow. Inside the car, his hands shook slightly, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on nothing. He started the engine and drove for a few minutes without a destination until he parked in front of his lawyer's office. It was late, but he knew that the number was open 24 hours a day. When the voice on the other end of the line answered, he simply said, "We start now." That was all he needed to say. In the days that followed, David changed. The routine continued, the appointments continued, but something had changed. He didn't confront Laura. He didn't question her. He didn't accuse her. He acted as if nothing had happened. The morning kisses, the evening dinners, the conversations with the children, all continued. But his eyes, once full of tenderness, now watched with clinical attention. The love he felt was being replaced by a silent vigilance. He began to observe her schedule more closely, to listen more attentively to her vague reports about meetings and appointments. Everything sounded perfectly normal. Maybe too normal. And that was exactly what confirmed his suspicions. With the discreet support of a private detective appointed by his lawyer, David began to gather evidence. Photos, messages, call logs. Each new discovery was a stab in the back, but he endured it. There was a controlled fury and cold determination in his silence. He knew that catching them wasn't enough. He needed to dismantle that lie with surgical precision. The evidence was piling up. The meetings that coincided with happy hours, the lunches that lasted hours beyond what was acceptable, the trips back and forth to hotels hidden in corporate name reservations. He had it all. And yet, he would come home, kiss his children, smile at Laura, and ask her how her day was. And she, without suspecting a thing, continued with her performance. With his boss, the game was more complex. David needed to maintain a professional relationship. He knew that the man distrusted his leadership skills, that he saw him as someone trustworthy but lacking the ambition to surpass him. This worked to his advantage. He began to play quietly, to get close to members of the board, to show initiative behind the scenes, to build alliances where his boss didn't see them. At the same time, he gathered documents that showed subtle irregularities in internal finances, nothing scandalous, but enough to raise suspicions when placed under the right scrutiny. And everything was meticulously catalogued, prepared for the ideal moment. Laura, on the other hand, seemed to float in a parallel reality. Her guilt, if it existed, was disguised with programmed affection. The unexpected gifts, the loving messages, the carefully planned nights of seduction. It was all part of a performance that, for her, worked. Maybe she thought he was distracted, maybe she thought she deserved both worlds. But there were moments when she hesitated. A look that looked away too quickly, a colder touch, a pause between words that once flowed naturally. David captured every detail. And instead of confronting it, he stored it. It was as if she were digging her own abyss without realizing that he was already watching her from the other side, in silence. The children, innocent, followed along, oblivious to what was happening. Emily, now 8, loved to draw the family as a happy home, with the 4 of them holding hands in the sunshine. Noah, at 6, was beginning to read more fluently and loved running around to show his mother his achievements. The family image remained intact. And David was keen to keep it that way, for now. They did not deserve the ruin that was coming. He swore to himself that when it all came to a head, he would do everything he could to protect them from the impact, to ensure they had stability, love, and peace, even if he had to bear the brunt of the destruction alone. And then, at the end of a seemingly ordinary afternoon, Laura was getting ready for yet another appointment. She said it was a networking dinner with colleagues from the agency. She dressed up nicely, sprayed on the perfume she usually wore on special occasions, and said she would be back late. David walked her to the door, gave her a light kiss, and said he would take care of the children. She smiled, thanked him, and left. He waited for the car to turn the corner before picking up his phone and sending a short message, "Go." The detective was already in position. Hours later, David received the final package. High-resolution photos, check-in and check-out records from a luxury hotel, and one definitive image, her, hand in hand with her boss, walking into the same room. That night, he didn't sleep. He stayed in the living room, staring at the laptop screen with the tests open. The silence was absolute. Upstairs, his children were sleeping. The clock ticked by, and each second seemed to widen the emptiness inside his chest. The pain, sharp at first, gave way to a kind of numbness. There was no longer any surprise. There was confirmation. And, above all, there was a decision. The plan was ready. The pieces were in place. And the game that was unfolding was no longer about betrayal. It was about justice. But there was still something he didn't know. A missing piece, a hidden detail behind everything, something that escaped even the most attentive eyes. And when that piece was revealed, nothing would be the same again. Laura entered the house 2 days after the party with an almost rehearsed expression, trying to maintain an artificial serenity that didn't even convince herself. The atmosphere in the home was silent, but not in a cozy way. It was a dense, charged silence, like the calm before a storm that everyone knows is going to explode at any moment. David, sitting at the dining room table, was already waiting for her with a brown envelope beside him and a black folder in front of him. The children had been with their grandmother since the weekend, as a precaution, or, really, so that nothing would interrupt what was about to happen. Laura hesitated at the door for a moment, looked at him with hesitant eyes, as if searching in the other's expression for some clue as to what was to come. But David was calm, impassive. He beckoned her with a simple gesture of his hand, and she walked slowly, as if each step brought her closer to something inevitable. She sat down across from him, fixed her hair, took a deep breath and tried to smile, but the attempt died halfway through. David looked at her, but his eyes were no longer the same. There was no love or anger there. There was something much more dangerous, detachment. He stared at her for a few seconds before opening the folder and placing printed documents, color photos, organized screenshots, dates, times, hotel reservations, credit card transactions on the table. Laura looked at everything in silence. She didn't try to deny it, she didn't make a fuss. She just fixed her eyes on the evidence, and then on David, as if she was waiting for his sentence. He spoke calmly. He said he knew everything. That he had known for weeks. That he had watched every lie with open eyes and a sharp memory. He said that the betrayal alone would be unbearable, but that what hurt the most was having to share the house, the bed, the children, with someone who was deceiving him while she hugged him. Laura lowered her head. She said she didn't know what to say, that she was confused, that she felt lost, that she hadn't planned anything, that it was all just happening. David just interrupted her, pointing to the brown envelope. Inside was the official divorce petition, already filed. The content was clear: division of assets, full custody of the children with him, waiver of any rights on her part. She was paralyzed. She tried to react, began to cry, to beg. But he was direct. He said that she had not only betrayed him, but ridiculed him, that the trust had been destroyed with surgical precision. And that now, he had nothing left to offer but justice. Laura begged for a chance, asked about the children, the marriage, what they had lived. But David was already in another place, emotionally distant, irrecoverable. And it was then, when she thought nothing could get worse, that he revealed what he had not yet told anyone. With icy calm, he pulled a second envelope from the briefcase. He said he needed to tell her something he had been saving for the right moment. Something that wasn't about her, or her boss. It was about what was going on behind the scenes at the company, and about what he had discovered, by chance, by cross-referencing data that wasn't his. On the laptop screen, he opened a confidential document, which read, in red letters and stamped with priority, an internal compliance report from the company. The name of Laura's boss, also David's immediate superior, was linked to a financial scheme involving the diversion of operational resources and the manipulation of performance reports. But what made it all even more explosive was the name that appeared next to it, Laura. She paled. She tried to stammer that she didn't know what it was about. But he was relentless. He said there were records of emails between her and her boss over the past few months, in which they discussed fees, coverage, transfers. The messages weren't just about dates and seductions, they were about money. Laura, who believed she was only romantically involved with someone powerful, was, without realizing it, at the center of a massive corporate crime. She tried to say that she never received any money, that she was just following instructions, that she had no idea what was going on. David shot back, "That won't protect you, Laura. You were used. And I'm not going to save you from that." He said that, after collecting evidence of the betrayal, he began investigating other movements of his boss and found glaring inconsistencies in the company's figures. With the help of a contact in the auditing area, he obtained access to the preliminary report that the board of directors had not yet made public. Laura, both an accomplice and a victim, had actively participated in the campaigns that camouflaged the financial shortfall. The scam had been masterfully planned, manipulating performance data, hiding expenses at corporate events, diverting funds to shell accounts, all using the departments in which she worked as a bridge to cover up her lover's misdeeds. Laura broke down. Her tears were no longer just from fear of losing her family. They were tears of terror. She understood that there was no way out. She knew that her name would be involved, that a judicial investigation would not be long in coming. David confirmed this. He said that, although he had not yet reported her, it was only a matter of time. That the company would take action, that the scandal would explode. And that, when it did, he would not lift a finger for her. The marriage was dead, the children would remain in his care, and she would face everything alone. She tried to defend herself, but every word she said made her sink deeper. When she mentioned that she had been coerced, he replied coldly, "You were seduced by ambition, not threatened. You had a choice." The phone rang. David answered with a simple, "I'm with her now." It was the lawyer. He said the documents were ready to be officially delivered the next morning. Laura sat in shock, not knowing whether to cry, scream or beg. But David was already up. He grabbed his coat and car keys. He told her she had until the next day to get her things out of the house. That he had already arranged a place to stay with the children for a few days, and that he would have everything ready with his mother to receive them. She tried to grab his arm, but he just looked at her with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "You didn't just destroy a marriage, Laura. You destroyed your own history. And you did it with your own hands." As he walked out the door, he felt a weight lift for the first time in weeks. It was no relief. It was acceptance. Of what he lost, of what he suffered, of what he needed to become. As he walked through the dark night toward his car, one last phrase echoed inside him, spoken by an old friend years ago and which now took on a brutally real meaning: "Sometimes, what destroys a man is not what is taken from him. It is what he sees, and can never unsee." And David, now, no longer saw Laura as a mistake. I saw it as a warning. A living scar of how trust, when broken, can take someone to places from which there is no return. But there was something he hadn't told anyone yet. One last move. An action he kept secret. And that would change everything, even for those who thought they had already lost everything. The next day, before the sun even rose, David had already left the house. The children's suitcase had been packed since the night before, organized with the precision of someone who knew that, from then on, time would demand more than impulsive reactions, it would demand strategy. He took Emily and Noah to his mother's house, where everything was already prepared to welcome them: clean rooms, favorite toys scattered in the right corners, the loving presence of a grandmother who, although she only knew fragments of what was happening, welcomed them with the wisdom of someone who understands that, faced with ruins, the most urgent thing is to guarantee shelter. David didn't explain anything to his children, he just said that they were going to spend a few days with Grandma because he needed to sort out work stuff. The children accepted with the trust of those who see a safe place in their father's eyes, and this tore him apart inside more than any confrontation with Laura could have caused. Meanwhile, the other side of the city was waking up in a state of collapse. Laura hadn't slept. She had spent the night reviewing each line of the emails, trying to understand how she had gotten herself caught up in something so much bigger than her ability to control. It wasn't just the betrayal of her love that hurt now, it was the brutal realization that, in her eagerness to experience something new, to feel desired again, she had become a disposable piece in a dirty game. She had tried to contact her boss several times, but he hadn't responded. She called his personal number, his company number, sent encrypted messages, even tried a video call. All of them were ignored. His silence was the cruelest of responses, he was protecting himself. He was distancing himself, covering his tracks, ready to leave her alone with the consequences. In the early afternoon, she received an unexpected visit from a legal messenger. The official divorce papers, now in hand, left no room for doubt. It was real. And it was irrevocable. The clauses were detailed: waiver of assets, full custody for Davi, zero rights over future family decisions. Laura, who had for so long felt in control of everything, was now in freefall. He tried calling the family lawyer, but his voice was too shaky to form cohesive sentences. He made an urgent appointment, but he knew, deep down, that the legal battle would be a reflection of what he had already lost emotionally. Alone in the kitchen, surrounded by a house that no longer belonged to her, she buried her hands in her hair and screamed in a muffled, suffocating silence, swallowed by her own mistakes. David, for his part, did not stop. He spent the afternoon in a meeting with the company's board members. The fraud report, now finalized with his help, was presented with indisputable evidence. The illicit financial movements, the embezzlement of funds and the emails that directly linked the company's president to the irregular operation caused an institutional earthquake. There was shock, indignation, and urgency. The decision was immediate: preventive removal of the CEO, opening of an internal investigation and direct communication with the tax authorities. David, with a calm demeanor, simply watched the developments. He did not ask for applause, did not claim credit. His part had been done. All he wanted at that moment was distance. And justice. That same night, Laura was summoned to appear at the company headquarters to provide clarification. He sat before a panel of directors and advisors, their eyes heavy with judgment, their faces hard. He explained what he knew, what he didn't know, what he thought he knew. He cried. He apologized. He claimed naivety. But the evidence no longer depended on emotion. Digital signatures on fraudulent documents, correspondence exchanged outside institutional channels, invitations to events disguised as meetings, all pointed to direct involvement. Even if she had not received any money, which was true, her participation was enough to make her an accomplice. She left there devastated, with the recommendation of immediate removal and the guidance to seek a criminal lawyer. The woman who, weeks before, had been dancing radiantly on a party floor, was now shuffling her feet like a shadow of herself. 2 days later, the story hit the press. A corporate scandal involving the top management of one of the most solid companies in the region was causing shock in the newspapers and on the networks. Images began to circulate, excerpts from documents, excerpts from parties, excerpts from everything. David, who had been anonymous in the story until then, was mentioned as a collaborator in the investigation. Laura's name appeared next to that of the CEO, and with that, what had previously been just a marital secret became a public matter. Neighbors whispered, colleagues kept quiet when they saw her, friends avoided contact. Loneliness was now physical, social, concrete. Laura tried to see the children. She called several times, sent messages. David responded only once, with a simple sentence, "They're fine. Right now, it's not the right time." His tone was not cruel. It was firm. He knew that this was the limit. There was no more room for attempts at reconnection. Deep down, she knew that too. There was no way to justify the unjustifiable. She missed her children as if she were missing a vital organ in her body. The absence of their laughter, of their drawings around the house, of their little hands tugging at her blouse, everything was now absent. Guilt was a constant presence, hammering at her chest without respite. Unable to stay in the house where everything had fallen apart, Laura packed some bags and went to her sister's house. The silence of the borrowed room was crueler than any judgment. She spent her nights staring at the ceiling, replaying scenes, searching for exactly where she had lost her way. The problem is that, contrary to what she wanted to believe, there was not just one moment. There were several. Small deviations, small permissions. An unresolved need, a misguided admiration, a desire to be seen again as a woman and not just as a mother or wife. And between these spaces, the error entered and spread like an invisible poison. Realizing this was devastating. But it did not change the facts. While she sank into a pit of regret, David began to put his life back together. He moved with his children to a smaller, more practical, more welcoming house. He created a stable routine for Emily and Noah, hired a child psychologist, and made sure to maintain a school routine, sleep schedules, and family meals. On weekends, she took them to the park, watched movies on the couch, learned how to braid her daughter's hair, and built pillow castles with her son. There was pain, of course. But there was also rebirth. Every small gesture now was an attempt to reconstruct not only the children's childhood, but the image he had of himself. She discovered that she was stronger than she imagined, and that the love of her children was a force that no adultery would be able to destroy. One afternoon, while waiting for Emily to leave ballet class, he met a woman named Clare. Her daughter was also in the same class. They started with small talk, then exchanged shy laughter, and little by little, they built a light complicity. Clare was a widow, calm, with an easy smile and eyes that knew how to listen. She never forced intimacy, never asked invasive questions. She was just there. And David, still with the debris of the past throbbing in his chest, found in her a silent presence that reminded him that there was still life beyond the pain. The conversations turned into walks, the walks into coffees. And the coffees, at some point, turned into entire afternoons spent with the children, in comfortable silence and small touches that required no promises. For the first time in a long time, David felt that it was possible to smile effortlessly. That same week, Laura received official notice of the sentence: loss of custody of the children, temporary restriction of visits until a psychological evaluation, no participation in the marital assets. It was the end of a story that, by her own choice, she had destroyed. She sat on her sister's couch and cried until she could cry no more. There was no one to blame. No argument, no sentence that could undo the damage. She remained silent for hours. Then she got up and began to write a letter. Not to David, he didn't need an explanation, but to her children. Simple words, attempts to ask for forgiveness. She didn't know if they would ever understand. But she needed to write, if only to ease the weight she carried inside. Across town, David watched Claire help Emily with her homework while Noah drew on his lap. He took a deep breath, looked around, and felt, perhaps for the first time, that he no longer needed to understand the past to live in the present. There was still pain, yes. There were still memories that hurt. But there was also something stronger, peace. And it was in that moment, with his eyes fixed on the image of what he had rebuilt with his own hands, that he understood the most important thing. He had not been destroyed by betrayal. He had been revealed by it. And now, what lay ahead, was a new story. The air in the new house had a different weight, a different rhythm, a different acoustic. There were no more background noises laden with tension, no more footsteps contained in the corridors, no more silences that hid monsters. There were now children's voices that intersected with laughter, the sound of spoons against cereal bowls in the morning, and that feeling of starting over that doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. David organized his routine in detail, finding security in the small repetitions of everyday life. Waking up early, preparing the children's coffee, packing their lunch boxes, saying good morning with a kiss on the forehead and watching the slow awakening of children's eyes. All of this formed a kind of ritual that, although new, gave him back a kind of control that he believed he had lost forever. It was no longer just about moving on, it was about rebuilding the ground that had crumbled beneath their feet, and providing their children with a solid foundation on which to grow away from the lies that had once threatened to disintegrate their childhood. In the following days, while the world around her began to move again, Laura remained in a state of near suspension. The hours stretched on in her sister's borrowed apartment as if time refused to pass, as if regret had extended its tentacles and kept her trapped in a cycle of self-recrimination. He tried to maintain some semblance of dignity in front of others, but the truth is that every court notification, every absence of his children, every report shared on social media was a silent stab at his identity. The woman who once saw herself as independent, determined, in control of her choices, was now barely able to hold her own thoughts without sinking into a sea of regrets. I tried to occupy my mind with routine tasks, but everything seemed pointless. The distance from his children hurt more than any sentence. It was as if the soul had been displaced from its own body, and it wandered, incomplete, not knowing if it would ever be forgiven, or even heard. Meanwhile, in David's routine, the unexpected became every day. Meetings with Clare became an organic part of his days, not out of need, not out of distraction, but out of true affinity. He didn't look for replacements or temporary relief. He had learned, through pain, the value of a bond that is born from listening, patience, and sincerity. Clare didn't try to take up any space. She appeared as a gentle presence, as if she knew that wounds don't require haste, but rather constancy. The children had created a bond with her that surprised David, especially because of the natural way everything flowed. Emily would proudly show him her drawings, Noah would ask her to tell him bedtime stories when Clare passed by. It was as if, even without understanding, they recognized there as a safe haven. And this, more than any romantic gesture, was what made David open up space within himself to accept that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't completely buried under the rubble of the past. Despite his apparent serenity, there were days when David would sink into profound silence. He didn't speak, he didn't smile. He would simply observe the world around him, trying to assimilate the magnitude of what he had experienced. It was at these times that he would think again about the choices he had made, what he had exposed, what he had decided not to hide anymore. He would ask himself if he had been too fair, too cold, too quick. He didn't feel guilty, but he did feel heavy. After all, he had been the one who had built the castle of evidence, who had organized the fall of two empires, the conjugal and the corporate. And although he knew that none of it had been born of impulse, there was a part of him that still bled in silence. Not because of the decision, but because he had been forced to make it. Having to punish someone he once loved is a kind of martyrdom that time does not easily dissolve. At the same time, Laura was looking for ways to get back on her feet. He tried to contact former co-workers, sought legal support to at least negotiate the terms of the sentence, and began attending therapy sessions. Initially, it was out of obligation, a recommendation from the lawyers. But little by little, she realized that that space was the only one where she could still be true without fear of judgment. She began to talk about the emptiness before the betrayal, about the feeling of invisibility that consumed her before she even crossed the line of loyalty. She spoke of the accumulated resentment, the lack of dialogue, the way she felt that, little by little, she had stopped being the protagonist of her own life and had become an extra in a story that revolved around her husband's success and the needs of her children. It was a speech that did not ask for absolution. It was a cry for understanding. Not to erase the mistakes, but to understand where the cracks began. For the first time, he began to see that before he betrayed, he had betrayed himself. And that somehow hurt more. One afternoon, David received a letter. Not digital. A handwritten letter, with familiar handwriting. It was from Laura. He held it for a while before opening it. He didn't know what to expect, but curiosity got the better of him. He read it with attentive eyes and held his breath. The letter didn't apologize. It didn't demand anything. It was a story. An emotional confession. It said that now, belatedly, he understood the value of everything he had done for her, for the family. That he recognized how much he had fought in silence to maintain what she herself had sabotaged. And that, despite all the suffering, he didn't harbor hatred, only an irreplaceable emptiness. It ended by saying that he accepted the separation, but that he hoped that one day, even if it was in another time, he would be able to look his children in the eyes and tell them that he had truly tried to be a better person after all this. David closed the letter in silence. He didn't answer. But he read it twice. And kept it. Days later, when picking up his children from school, David noticed Emily watching the back seat in unusual silence. He asked if everything was okay, and she said in a whisper, "Daddy, will Mommy ever come back?" The question hit him raw. There was no easy answer. She stopped the car on the shoulder and looked into her daughter's eyes. He said Mom was trying to work through difficult things, but that he loved them very much. And that maybe, in time, they could find it somewhere else in their lives. Not the same one, but a new one. Emily just nodded. But in that gesture, David felt something rare, hope. Meanwhile, Clare maintained her delicate posture. Never forced anything. It never presented itself as a substitute, nor as a solution. But there was something in the way she listened, the way she hugged the children, the way she smiled without judging, that made her presence feel like a natural part of the new story. David, although cautious, began to allow himself to dream of a future where he would not only carry pain, but also new beginnings. I wouldn't erase the past, that would be foolish. But maybe I could give it a new meaning. After all, it's not about forgetting what was experienced. It's about accepting that life goes on. And that it is possible, yes, to build something good after the fall. At her sister's house, Laura got up earlier. She started taking a design course, something she had always wanted to do but had put off for years. It was far from a form of redemption, but it was a start. I had learned, in the most painful way possible, that there is no way to rescue everything, but there is always a way to rebuild some part. Little by little, he gained a certain autonomy. I still cried at night. He still woke up with his children's names on his lips. But now there was purpose to the days. And that, while small, was a lot more than I had a few weeks ago. And so, as the days piled up in timid steps towards a new reality, everyone involved in that plot advanced between ruins and possibilities. David, increasingly certain that he would never be the same man again. Laura, trying to find a version of herself that she could respect. Children are slowly learning that families can change in form, but not in love. And Clare, with her firm and sweet presence, helping to give color to a daily life that had already known the gray of abandonment. There were still difficult decisions to be made. Postponed meetings, pending conversations, memories that insisted on visiting us in the early hours of the morning. But there were also sincere smiles, new stories being born, looks that no longer carried guilt, but freedom. There was still one last choice left, one last gesture that could seal what each of them would become from then on. And it was this decision that hung in the air, like a leaf about to fall, uncertain about where to land. Autumn was slowly advancing, painting the trees with burnt orange and aged gold tones, and the city seemed to settle into a more serene rhythm, as if even time understood that certain pains call for softer landscapes. David was beginning to feel that the weight on his chest had changed shape. It was no longer the burden of shock, of raw betrayal or humiliation. Now it was a kind of living scar, that stung from time to time, but that also reminded him of how much he had endured. He no longer needed to look back every day. He no longer woke up anxiously wondering if she would show up, if she would say something, if she would try to reverse the irreversible. Life was organized within a new logic, a routine built in silence and sustained by real bonds, the kind that don't need promises, just presence. It was one Saturday morning, when she was taking her children to the park, that Clare suggested, almost without meaning to, a little trip the following weekend. A quiet, secluded place where children could run, play and breathe away from the hustle and bustle. David hesitated for a moment. The idea of leaving the safe bubble he had been in made him uncomfortable. But when he saw the sparkle in Emily and Noah's eyes, he understood that maybe it was time to allow himself a new scenario, far from the memories that every corner of the city still held. Accepted. And during the days leading up to the trip, he found himself smiling lightly, as if remembering that life can also be simple. The afternoon before the match, he received an unexpected message. Not Laura's. But from her sister, who was with her since the beginning of the downfall. It was short, direct, but filled with something between concern and pleading. He said that Laura was becoming emotionally ill, that she had withdrawn to a dangerous point, and that perhaps a conversation with David, not about reconciliation, but about dignity, might be in order. David read and reread the message. The immediate response within him was silence. But the restlessness persisted. Not out of pity, not out of doubt, but because he still carried a deep sense of justice, and perhaps, more than anything, the certainty that certain cycles only end when what needs to be said is said. He didn't answer. He just tucked that message away in an inner corner, like someone who doesn't yet know what to do with it, but understands that ignoring it completely would be inhumane. The trip was a breath of fresh air. The place, surrounded by low hills and gentle trails, looked like something out of a book. Emily and Noah ran around like the world was new, Clare prepared snacks and took spontaneous photos, and David, for entire moments, forgot about everything. He forgot about the trial, the evidence, her name in the newspapers, the scandal. He even forgot about himself as a betrayed man, and just allowed himself to be a father. He just existed there, whole. As the children fell asleep cuddled together in the back seat on the way back, Clare rested her head on his shoulder in the silence of the road. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. It was the kind of stillness that said more than long speeches. And there, in that calm touch, David felt he could finally let go of control. That there was more beauty in starting over than he imagined. When she got home, she found an envelope at the front door. The handwriting was familiar, but there was a subtle difference. It didn't shake, it didn't seem fragile. It was firm, almost determined. She took the children upstairs, put them to bed, and only then, in the solitude of the living room, did she open the letter. This time, Laura wrote with less guilt and more clarity. She said that she had been called to give a new statement in the investigation and that, after some hesitation, she decided to tell everything, including what she knew could cost her even more. She revealed that her former boss, in exchange for her loyalty, had promised to free her from any legal implications. She showed messages that indicated manipulation, false promises, and even veiled threats. But the most shocking thing came in the last lines. She had handed over all the remaining files, collaborated with details that were still unknown, and signed a plea bargain. She knew she would be judged, punished, and exposed. But she wanted to make it clear that, for the first time, she was doing something right. Not for herself. But for her children. David sat in silence for a long time. The words hammered at his mind, and the moral dilemma came back to him like an old acquaintance. I could just turn my back and move on with my new life. She had everything for this, the children, the peace, Clare. But there was also a part of him that still carried an unbreakable sense of responsibility. Not for Laura as a woman, but as the mother of her children. He knew that at some point he would have to look into her eyes again. And that moment came 2 days later, when she decided to show up at her sister's house as a surprise. Laura opened the door with sunken eyes, but no tears. It was different. No longer dejected, but resigned. She dressed simply, without makeup, without adornments. Like someone who no longer wanted to hide who he had become. David asked for just a few minutes. They sat on the porch. He didn't ask anything. Just listened. And she spoke. Above all. About the beginning of her relationship with her boss, about the emptiness that consumed her, about the fear of losing what she had and the stupid belief that she would be able to live two lives. She also talked about the day he saw her dance, the way she felt her heart stop when she caught his gaze across the crowd. He said that at that moment he knew he had lost everything, but he didn't have the courage to face the truth. It was cruel in silence. But now, I was at least trying to be honest. David listened to the end. And when she fell silent, he just said he didn't hate her. That there was no more room for hate. But there was also no room for return. That the pain she caused was irreversible, but that her attempt to do the right thing, even if late, did not go unnoticed. He said that, out of respect for his children, he would not encourage war, but would maintain a distance that would protect them. Laura nodded. I didn't expect anything different. What I didn't expect, however, was what came next. He looked her in the eye and told her that if she would remain responsible and committed, he would consider allowing a supervised reunion with the children. Not now. But soon. With caution. With boundaries. She tried to thank him, but he interrupted. He said this wasn't a gift. It was a chance. Her last. And that the path wouldn't be easy. But if she really wanted to rebuild something, she would have to walk that path alone. That night, David returned home with a restless but light heart. He knew that this gesture would not erase what had happened. But perhaps, there, he had given a new meaning to what it means to win. Not for revenge, but for dignity. For the chance to show his children that, even after destruction, it is still possible to act with humanity. And it was at this point in the story that a new question began to grow within him. Not about the past. But about what would come now. Because sometimes the true ending is not the one that closes a wound. But what it shows is that, even with the scar, it's still worth reaching out, even if it's just to say, I'm not what they did to me. I am what I choose to do with it. A few months had passed since David and Laura's last conversation on that cold spring porch. Life, with its relentless way of reorganizing everything after the chaos, had settled into a new rhythm. David remained firm in his decision to protect his children above any personal emotion. Emily and Noah no longer asked as many questions about their mother, but every now and then something would awaken them, a memory, a smell, a gesture, and their eyes would be lost in deep silences that betrayed longing. Clare, with her constant sensitivity, knew how to welcome these moments without invading, without trying to fill spaces that did not belong to her. The bond between her and David matured over time, without rushing, without empty promises, built on the solid foundation of presence and truth. He did not declare himself in love as he used to do so easily, but there was a depth in every touch, in every look, that transcended words. The love was now more mature, more serene and more real. For the first time, he felt whole, not because someone else completed him, but because he had rebuilt himself on his own and chosen to share this new version with someone who knew how to respect his scars. Laura, in turn, lived each day with the exact weight of her decisions. The public repercussions of the corporate scandal were not fleeting. She lost friends, opportunities, and the respect of the professional community that she had spent years building. And, even after cooperating with the investigations and signing a deal that spared her prison, she did not escape the indelible mark of dishonor. She was invited to give lectures, interviews, and projects to prevent corporate corruption. But she refused them all. She felt that this was not the time to teach anyone anything. It was time for silence, for listening, for humility. She continued to live at her sister's house for a while, until she rented a small apartment where, alone, she lived with the bare necessities. There, she found space to reflect, to make mistakes without being seen, and to rebuild not a reputation, but her own identity. Her contact with her children remained limited to notes, drawings, and letters exchanged under the supervision of psychologists. And even in these short lines, she dedicated herself as if she were writing a will. She knew she couldn't ask for love, but she tried to cultivate at least a future memory that said, she tried. Deep down, this was her last chance to remain human in her own eyes. The former boss, the pivot of the institutional collapse and Laura's emotional ruin, had a different fate. After months on the run, he was arrested in a joint operation with international authorities. The corruption network he had orchestrated included accounts in tax havens, fraudulent contracts, and bribes disguised as corporate sponsorships. The sentence was severe, with prison sentences and fines that destroyed his fortune. In his downfall, he dragged many other names, but he was unable to absolve Laura of her guilt, nor to rescue his own image. He aged publicly, becoming a symbol of greed and manipulation, while Laura, despite all her mistakes, was still seen by some as a woman who fell due to emotional weakness, and not cold calculation. A subtle but definitive difference. At David's house, the days took on a new glow when he and Claire decided, without fanfare, to start living together. The children accepted it naturally, and they already saw her as part of the family. And with this new arrangement, the house gained other sounds, conversations while preparing dinner, laughter between homework assignments, knowing glances at the small achievements of everyday life. Claire never tried to replace the mother figure, but became a reference of affection, stability, and security. When Emily fell at school and needed comfort, she ran into her arms. When Noah woke up scared from a nightmare, it was Claire's voice that calmed him. And David, watching all this, didn't feel jealous or afraid. He felt gratitude. Because he understood, deep down, that life was offering him a second chance, and that, for everything he had suffered, he deserved to live it to the fullest. One afternoon, while the four of them were strolling through an open-air market, they happened to run into Laura's sister. The encounter was brief, polite, but full of unspoken meaning. She looked at them with a mixture of surprise and silent approval. Before saying goodbye, she took a letter out of her pocket and handed it to David, saying only, "She wrote it yesterday." He thanked her and put it away without reading it. At home, after putting the children to bed, she sat on the sofa and opened the envelope. The handwriting was firmer, and the content was different from anything Laura had written before. There were no more pleas, no more justifications. Just a reflection. She said that she had finally understood what love was, not that which consumes, demands, lies. But that which protects, sustains, gives itself even without an audience. She also said that she expected nothing more, not forgiveness, not a chance, not redemption. She just wanted David to know that she had learned. That perhaps belatedly, but she had learned. When he finished reading, David did not cry. But his heart felt lighter. Not because Laura had said something transformative, but because he himself had already been transformed. He no longer needed the pain to remember the lesson. And in that moment, he understood the size of his journey. It wasn't just about being betrayed, losing a wife, or unmasking a lover. It was about keeping her children grounded, preserving what was left of herself, and yet not allowing hate to taint what came next. It was about choosing to be bigger than the chaos. And he had succeeded. A few days later, during a walk in the park, Claire asked if he had ever thought about getting married again. The question was asked naturally, without pressure, as if simply opening a door to the future. David smiled, looked at his children playing in the grass, and said he didn't think of it as a new beginning, but as a continuation. Because life doesn't erase pages. She writes above, to the side. And if the new lines are written with truth, the past ceases to be a prison and becomes a foundation. Claire understood. And he held her hand with a silence that said it all. Laura, in turn, sitting at her study table, received the news that week that her social design project had been approved by a foundation that supports women in life transition. She would speak, finally, but not as a victim or as a counselor, just as someone who had been through it, who had fallen, who had gotten up. The first lecture would be at a public school, in front of young people who knew little about his name or his history. And that's what motivated her. Because, perhaps, there was a real chance to transform something. Not what she did, but what others might avoid doing. And when he went on stage, he didn't talk about the betrayal, nor the pain. He spoke of the importance of listening to the silences within oneself before they become screams that destroy what is most valuable. That night, David watched his children sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed and remembered everything. From the first dance with Laura. The smile she gave when she surprised him at work. Of simple dinners. Of laughter before lies. It was all still there, somewhere in him. But now, without anger. Just as a record of a life lived. He got up, turned off the light, and as he lay down next to Clare, his chest felt warm not with intensity, but with peace. And he understood that sometimes the truly happy ending isn't one where everyone wins. But where everyone, in some way, learns. If you've made it this far, leave a comment with your thoughts on this story. What would you do if you were the protagonist? Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following stories that touch, teach and, above all, show life as it really is. Remember, betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, it tears apart trust, corrupts families, tears out the roots of affection and turns love into rubble. Forgiveness may come. Overcoming, perhaps. But scars never come away unscathed. Let this story serve as a painful but necessary reminder, there is no justification for betrayal. It never builds. It always destroys. And here on the channel, we make this very clear, we do not support any kind of betrayal. Never. Until the next story.